address a social problem. Oh, by the way, that car is just going to make the world better or cleaner but it's, intentionally trying to, change how society works for the good. And it can happen across many, many different areas. Almost always in the work I do and the work we see, it's through partnerships. And I think that's one of the things that we need to understand better, we need to teach more, we need to experience more, but you can very rarely take a great idea, whether it's a great commercial idea or a great social idea or a great educational idea, and on your own or within your own organization make it huge in scale and make a difference on your own. It's almost always going to have to be some sort of partners, and I believe strongly, and I think there's a lot more evidence to this fact, that the best innovation that really changes the world comes through multi-sector partners, meaning we have governments involved, we have private sector, and we have social sector, academic, nonprofit, foundations, because it's through those different sets of organizations and incentives that people can actually get together and really move the needle. And so I focus a lot of my work and my thinking about how to build those partnerships and kind of go beyond scaling a social enterprise, which is where a lot of social entrepreneurs focus, to how do you scale the social innovation. And it may involve actually letting go of your enterprise. And it may involve actually handing things off, as we do in the commercial sector. We sell and we exit strategy. We have exit strategies, and the social sector's not very good at that. So we've got to learn as a social sector how we can allow our idea to flourish in other people's hands, and that's part of the work I do. And then I do think that we have to look at not sustainability itself, meaning that it's financially sustainable, because the problem with that definition is that some of the hardest problems in the world will never be financially sustainable in terms of making money, because we're focused on the poorest people in the world, at least the work I do. And there's no markets in many of these places, so there's utter market failure. And so to say, well, if something should be just sustainable, meaning it needs to make its money pay for itself, that sets you up for not addressing some of the hardest problems in the world. So I think that the issue is, can we make a long-term impact? Can it be more than just a one-off? Can it disrupt the system and change it? But I don't think it's necessarily defined as self-sustaining financially. I think we're going to need philanthropic, government, and other ways to subsidize certain activities, because otherwise, the reason the problem exists is because the markets and governments have failed. So I work a lot in this area. I can talk more as we do the Q&A. But I really like to focus what I sometimes call as described, this unsexy middle of the value chain, this unsexy place between a great idea and delivering it, and all the things we have to do, from testing it and building evidence to figuring out how to get it approved and regulated, to all the operational research, etc. So this is generally, this is maybe a little more than you want to know about, teaching in the social innovation to mainly graduate students here at Stanford. But this is, I think, a ripe area for people to engage in their work. So where does that lead me? Well, so it leads me to, how do we actually think about a big global problem and start developing solutions and scaling them up and partnering to do that? So this is the chart that I'm now, in my current role, and I've been for a number of years, pretty obsessed with, which is, we're actually making progress. So one thing I always like to talk about, I did a TED Talk last week, and I was reminding people that it's, the world, the headlines look pretty grim some days. And there are a lot of grim headlines, and I'm very concerned about where we are in the state of the world on many levels. But the trend lines in the world are amazing. There are fewer people living in poverty than ever in the history of the world. There are people living with better health globally than ever in the world. There's more, the trend line is actually quite good. And this is the trend line, of course, that we focus on in health, and two of many indicators. But you can see that current trajectory has been quite solid. We have reduced maternal mortality and child mortality by about 50% in the last 25 years. So that's a big progress that's made because we've invested new innovation, we've worked on new technologies, we've seen global development itself rise people into the middle class. So this is a good set of trends. But my work and what I try to obsess on with my teams is to change this and bend the curve. So our kind of thinking about the role of social innovation is, can we actually bend that curve? Not just assume that it's just going to continue, but can we actually bend the curve to make a bigger difference? And the difference between the red and the blue is, the opportunity to save millions of lives, but it's also the opportunity to do some pretty interesting work. And so with that, where does social innovation come in? Well, I would say I happen to have the opportunity to run one of the coolest social innovation enterprises in the world. It's not a particularly well-known brand. We work so much in partnerships, we never have our name on anything. We try to always be a little bit behind the scenes, but we're one of the largest NGOs. And we've been around for about 40 years. It stands initially it's no longer, we don't use it, but the Program for Perfect Technology in Health. That's why it's now an acronym, because that's a big gobbly name. And basically, the idea is to say we can bend that curve by innovating health solutions and getting them to the people that need them the most, and primarily the poorest and lowest resource communities in the world. So with that, we focus on, we're a global organization. We have about 1,600 employees. We work in 70 countries around the world. The majority of my employees are in Africa and Asia, and we are primarily Africans and Asians. It's not, we don't have a lot of expats going out and doing this work. We have a huge scale. So unlike a lot of NGOs, we are at touching a couple 100 million lives every year. So this is a pretty broad mandate. So how do we do that? And I'll go through just a couple things and then kind of explain. We can slow it down and open it up. But how do we do that? Well, we actually focus on 5 core areas of work, which we think are really critical to bending that curve and to changing outcomes in poor communities around the world. We are one of the largest vaccine organizations in the world, including with industry. So we actually work on a number of vaccines that otherwise the markets themselves or industry themselves don't focus on, because there's not any money in it. I mean, so there's a lot of people, industry, pharmaceutical industry, the biotech industry focuses on important health issues, and they are our very important ally in this work. But they're left to themselves. They're going to focus on things like cancer and certain diseases that are affected mainly by people in the developed world and the richer world. Well, there are a number of diseases that mainly are the diseases of poverty. They are caused by poverty, they cause poverty, and we've actually managed to eliminate or reduce many of them in more affluent parts of the world. So, say malaria. We eliminated malaria in this country in the Americas in 1951. Today, still about 400,000 people a year die of malaria. And most of those are African children under 5. So this is a big problem that's really inequitable in the world, but the markets are not naturally going to go after that market. So we work to say, okay, let's identify those diseases and those areas where the world needs a solution. We need to either bring philanthropic support, or we need to build partnerships to bring people to help address that. And can we actually develop a malaria vaccine, working in partnership, and can we then hopefully go after and reduce or control that malaria? And so we worked on the first ever malaria vaccine. We drove that project with GlaxoSmithKline. GSK was our industry partner, and many others. But and I'll give you an example of a vaccine project in a minute. So we work on a lot of different vaccines. I won't go through all the names because I can't even pronounce half of them. And a lot of candidates, everything from how do we develop a new vaccine to how do we look at a vaccine that might be out there that saves many, many lives in the richer part of the world, but it's too expensive for some parts of the world or for the public markets. So how can we create a cheaper version of that vaccine? So we work a lot on affordability. And then we also work on all sorts of products to make a vaccine safer to deliver, easier to deliver, and things like that. So we have hundreds of products on our pipeline. We also do that with drugs. A good example here is again in malaria, although we work on a lot of things other than malaria, but the malaria, the main thing that people take to prevent malaria is a drug that is actually sourced from a wormwood tree, which is a tree out of China, mainly grown in China. But the challenge is because it's a natural wood product, the cycle of production goes up and down, and a drought and affected, and suddenly the next year you have a stock out of the malarial drug because you don't have the supply evened out. So we looked at that problem. We addressed it by saying, could we work with biotech to get a synthetic version of that product built and create a reservoir, not to undermine the wormwood products, but actually to keep the world supply even, so we wouldn't run out if there was a drought or if there was a slowdown in production. So we've done that, and now we have that reservoir of that product available for the world. And then we work on a number of other drugs, both that and delivery. One of the most interesting things we're doing right now is combining some of these things. I'll get to the others, but what we try to do in a lot of the poorest parts of the world where we're working, where there's not enough health workforce, is say, we can't always have people who are really well trained to do things that you and I would take for granted here or in Europe or in China.